The wind had teeth, not the playful nip of autumn, but the deep bite of a thing that meant to kill. Outside, the night sky was a vault of stars so bright and cold they seemed to burn, each one a tiny, distant hearth fire that offered no warmth to those below. Inside the longhouse, Arsa moved with practised urgency, checking the night's preparations one final time. "The windward wall needs more spruce boughs packed along the sill," Arsa said, breath silvering in the lamplight. Kettle nodded, and their eldest was already hauling the boughs they'd cut for nights like this. This was the night the elders had warned about, for weeks, the first true killing cold of winter, the night when the unprepared might not see morning. Arsa ran through her mental inventory as she did each evening after the harvest moon. Food stores hung and sealed against vermin. Check water barrels filled and covered. Check extra fuel stacked within arm's reach of the central hearth. Check livestock penned in their winter byre, the shared warmth of bodies, human and animal, as a bulwark against the cold. Check. In the far corner, her daughter worked steadily at the loom, fingers moving by memory in the dim light. The girl's eyes flicked to the small iron lamp that held just enough fish oil to illuminate her work. Oil that would need to last until spring, rationed like everything else in these months of darkness. At the doorway, their youngest hung the sealskin door curtain, making sure the bottom edge lay flush against the threshold. Panic wastes heat. He moved with the slow economy Arsa had drilled into them since the harvest moon. 200 miles inland, in a clearing ringed by pine, Thorvald performed his own inspection. His settlement was smaller than Kettle's coastal farm, just 3 longhouses clustered at the forest's edge. But the ritual was the same. Check the roof for gaps where heat could flee. Ensure the smoke hole could be covered quickly if snow began to fall. Count and recount the stores that must sustain them through the months ahead. Ragnhild moved among the sleeping platforms, checking that each person had enough layers of wool and fur. "The children's platform needs more straw beneath," she said quietly. "The floor is pulling the warmth out of them." Tonight would test all their summer's work. Nature would reveal any gap in planning, any flaw in preparation. The night must not fail. 1. Where north really is. Here's the first truth. North wasn't a pin on a map. It changed with sea, altitude, and daylight. Modern maps make Viking lands look uniformly frozen. The ground truth was a sliding scale of problems. Kettle's farm sat on Norway's western coast, warmed by the North Atlantic Drift, the Gulf Stream's extension. Winters were dark and stormy, more than strictly Arctic. Here, survival meant defeating wet as much as cold. Archaeology backs that up. Bedrock drainage cuts around buildings, long boat sheds, narsed, to protect vessels from gales, and storage arranged to keep goods dry, not just unfrozen. "We don't fear the cold as much as the wet," Kettle told his children. "Ice has rules you can learn. Water finds every weakness." By contrast, Thorvald's inland settlement near the Norwegian-Swedish border faced a different winter entirely. A continental climate locked in sustained freezing from early winter into spring. Snow climbed to a man's chest and temperatures sank lower than on the coast. Once the snow settled, it insulated the ground, and travel shifted to sled and ski. Houses sat on firmer foundations to resist frost heave. Wood piles grew taller, and food stores stretched further for long isolation. Latitude mattered as much as distance from the sea. At Kettle's farm, the winter sun still rose, barely, for a few hours. Farther north in Lofoten, where the great chieftain's hall at Borg stood, the sun disappeared entirely for weeks. Excavations there reveal massive dwellings. The hall ran over 80 metres, with room for people, animals and provisions enough to weather complete isolation. Iceland added another challenge. The sagas remember scarce timber. Archaeology confirms it. Settlers built turf-walled houses, using stone and driftwood for framework, trading height for insulation, and letting the earth itself hold heat. Law codes noticed the difference. The Gulathing law, Gulathing, which governed much of western Norway, acknowledged regional needs and winter realities. Clauses assign upkeep to what mattered locally. On the coast, the maintenance of sea marks and landings. Inland, keeping winter roads and bridges serviceable. The law itself recognised that strategies for surviving the dark season varied even within a single kingdom. What united these landscapes was the rhythm of light and dark. Whatever the temperature, every community faced the sun's retreat. As autumn waned, days contracted with startling speed. By midwinter, even southern Scandinavia had roughly 6 hours of daylight. That compression of light shaped everything: work cycles, gathering and travel, and how households kept spirits intact. Wintertime was measured differently than summer, and Norse communities built cultural tools to carry the mind through the dark months. Clustered labour at the hearth, story and song, visiting when weather allowed, and, later, church hours that punctuated the night. In short, North was never one place but a moving set of constraints. Coast or inland, wet or dry cold, brief daylight or none. And families survived by reading which North they lived in. Anatomy of a longhouse. The Norse longhouse was not just a building but a survival machine, balancing heat retention, smoke management, space for people and livestock, storage and winter work under one roof. Ketil's coastal longhouse matches late Viking age Western Norwegian types found across excavations. About 30 metres long and 8 metres wide at centre, its gently curved long walls helped shed wind and snow. The foundation was boulder footings, supporting sill beams, lifting timber above damp ground. Walls stood roughly 2 metres high, built in stave and plank fashion. Vertical posts with horizontal boarding. Gaps were chinked with moss, hair, wool, and clay daub, materials that needed renewing as they compacted, a pattern visible in repair layers at sites like Borg, Lofoten. "A house has to breathe," Asa told her youngest, as they pressed fresh moss into seams opened by autumn rains. "Too tight and smoke chokes us, too loose and the wind steals our heat." The roof was the hardest problem. Viking-age longhouses did not have chimneys. Smoke from the central hearths rose to a ridge vent, ljore. Households throttled that opening, in foul weather with boards or covers, trading ventilation against heat. Snow on the roof acted as insulation, but spring thaws meant leaks, hence a moderate pitch, steep enough to clear water, shallow enough to hold insulating snow. Inside, the house was zoned rather than roomed. Along the central axis lay 2 to 3 hearths in a house this size, seen archaeologically as bands of charcoal, reddened clay, and ash. Around them unfolded most of winter life: cooking, craft, child-minding, mending nets and gear. Meat and fish could be smoke-dried from the rafters, and the smoke layer helped deter pests. Privacy was minimal. Sleeping platforms ran along the long walls, raised 1/2 metre to escape floor drafts. Bedding spread across boards and chests. Simple curtains gave token separation, but the household mostly slept in view of one another. Thorvald's inland longhouse followed the same logic, with regional swaps. More split logs where sawn planks were scarce. A thicker birch bark layer beneath turf on the roof to bear heavier snow. And larger craft areas for woodworking and textiles, the winter's main work. Platforms were often built with storage compartments beneath to wring space from every board. Many longhouses show a shallow central trench down the floor's length, a practical gully lined with clay at some sites to catch spills, sweep ash, and drain meltwater dragged in on clothing and gear. The ends of the longhouse were specialised. In Ketil's coastal home, one end stored tools and precious trade goods. The other, behind a stout partition, sheltered priority livestock in the worst weather. Phosphate mapping of floors in excavations often marks just such animal zones. Heat for people, shelter for beasts, under one roof. Entrances were engineered for weather. Across Scandinavia, doorways show heavy posts and lintels, and in many places double door or porch arrangements that worked like a simple airlock, cutting heat loss when people moved in and out. "The door remembers who closes it," Asa would say, a line that agrees with Havermal's caution about thresholds. One careless latch, and a night's balance of warmth and air could fail. Heat and light management. In the Norse winter, heat was life and light was sanity. Managing both wasn't comfort. It was the organising principle that everything else bent around. The hearth, the long fire, ljore, formed the literal and figurative centre. Excavated longhouses show these were engineered features, not casual campfires. At Ketil's coastal farm, the main hearth was a stone-lined trough, about 2 metres long by 1 metre wide, bedded with sand and clay to spread heat and protect the floor. Fire is a servant that kills the careless. Ketil warned new arrivals. The sagas remember winter house fires, and excavations often preserve the burn layers that proved them. Hearth routine aimed for steady embers, not showy flames, heat without waste. In summer we cook over flames, Asa told her new daughter-in-law. In winter we cook in the coals. Fuel and food both went further that way. Fuel was sorted by job. Wood piles at waterlogged sites show deliberate grading by species and size. Birch for hot, clean burns, resin-rich pine knots / fatwood when extra light was needed. Slow, dense pieces banked for overnight smoulder. The right log at the right time meant fewer trips to the pile in the dark. What if the fire dies? A child asked on a cutting night. Every household kept a fire kit. A fire steel and flint, tinder fungus, amadou, processed from hoof fungus, birch bark curls, and tow or teased fibre for kindling. Friction fire was a last resort. Spark and tinder was faster when seconds mattered. Smoke management was a system in itself. With no chimney, smoke rose to the roof and drifted out the ridge vent, ljore. Surviving timbers and soils show heavy shooting near the roof, fading toward the floor. The result was stratification, clearer air from floor to shoulder height, smoke thickening above. People learned to live in the clear layer, work, pass, and cook low, while the smoke helped cure meat and deter pests higher up. Light followed the same logic of thrift. When the sun showed, it was welcomed through small openings. In higher status houses, some apertures were covered with scraped animal membrane or thin horn, rarely mica, to allow a wash of day without losing all the heat. Artificial light came from 3 main sources. The hearth itself, broad, low light for shared tasks. Iron or stone oil lamps, burning fish / seal oil, or rendered fat with a floating rush pith or twisted linen wick. Resinous splints, fatwood, wedged in holders for short, bright jobs, mending, knife work, threading. Light is dearer than gold in winter, Thorvald said, trimming a wick. Oil was rationed like food. Each task had its allowance. The clever part was social choreography, work needing vision, fine textile, carving run staves, sorting grain, clustered by the hearth or under a lamp while daylight lasted. Lower light tasks, spinning, carding, whittling, story and song, moved to the margins. Each flame created rings of activity to stretch illumination further. Heat and light shaped the winter social calendar. Some valleys' sagas remember neighbours consolidating households during the hardest weeks. Archaeologists sometimes find seasonally idle small buildings beside more heavily used halls, consistent with families pooling fuel, labour and watch. As winter deepened, Ketil's household fell into rhythm. Before dawn, nurse last night's coals from under ash into a living glow. With the day's brief light, spend it on sight-hungry work. By mid-afternoon, darkness gathered. The household contracted to the fire, choosing tasks that matched the ring of light. "How do they carry fire across the ice?" the youngest asked one night, thinking of travellers between farms. The answer would come later, a way to move heat without losing it to the wind, when the weather left them no choice. Clothing as infrastructure. In the Norse world, winter clothing wasn't merely protection. It was infrastructure, as essential as the longhouse. Finds from Birka, Hedeby and Greenland show a textile toolkit evolved for northern conditions that modern fabrics still struggle to beat. "Your summer clothes can fail you and you live," Asa told her children. "Your winter clothes fail you and you die." That was a practical truth. reflected in the care given to winter garments, in both finds and saga hints. The foundation was wool, not a flat, scratchy fabric, but a dual-coated fleece from northern sheep, long, water-shedding outer hairs, tog, over a fine, insulating undercoat, bell. The outer layer sheds snow and drizzles, the inner traps heat even when damp. Winter wear wasn't just thicker summer clothes. Burial sets and fragments point to a layering system. Base, a long-sleeved linen undertunic/underdress to wick sweat off the skin. Middle wadmal, vadmal, a dense 2x2 twill wool, fulled, shrunk and compacted to block wind. Many fragments hit 8 to 12 threads per centimetre, remarkably tight for hand weaving. Outer, cloaks, capes and hoods in the heaviest wadmal or hide fur depending on task and region. Clothes are too precious to waste on poor cutting, Asa reminded her daughters. Patterns from graves and bogs show economical cuts that preserve range of motion. Winter garments ran a bit looser than summer, not only for layering, but to trap warm air and avoid constricting circulation. A distinctive piece was the hooded cloak, carpa with hutta. Cloak and hood as one, sealing the neck gap modern coats often leave. Some examples double layer the shoulders for extra weather protection. Thorvald's inland climate leaned harder on fur. Inland finds and later traditions show fur trims, linings at frost risk points, face, wrists, ankles, with preferences like fox at the face, less frost build-up, beaver for wet ground/boot covers, and squirrel for light, warm mittliners. Footwear could make or break a winter. Boots from Hedeby and elsewhere show a sock-like wool liner, often made by null binding, nal binding, inside a shaped leather outer, with woven straw sedge grass, sennegrass, or felted inserts to lift the foot from cold leather. In severe cold, fur oversocks added another layer. "Your feet are your winter freedom," Ketil said each autumn as boots were readied. Sagas bear it out. Neglect feet, lose mobility, sometimes fatally. Hands used a two-layer logic. Wool liners, null binding, under leather mittens with minimal seams, reinforced thumbs for tool work. The most sophisticated feature was adaptability. Many garments used ties and lacing rather than fixed closures, letting the wearer vent while working and seal, when still, preventing the sweat then freeze cycle that ruins a day in the cold. Children's clothing mirrored adult sets with extra knee-elbow reinforcement. Outerwear was often cut large and handed down, stretching scarce cloth through multiple seasons. Maintenance never stopped. Stitch marks and patching show repeated repairs at stress points. Fulling and the fleece's natural lanolin gave wool its water resistance. Leather was re-oiled, greased, tallow, fish oil, beeswax mixtures, as needed. In Iceland, vadmal was even a standard cloth of account in law. Warmth doubled as currency. "Clothing is your first house," Asa told her youngest as they sewed. The same logic shaped sleeping gear, platforms layered with straw or hay, then wool blankets and furs to build a warm microclimate through the long night. By the first killing frost, both Ketil's coastal household and Thorvald's inland settlement had their layered systems ready, tailored to tasks and exposure. The clothing infrastructure stood, first line of defence against the winter to come. The food year, making winter calories in summer. In the Norse calendar, winter eating began in summer fields. The rule was simple and unyielding. If you eat it in January, you earned it in July. "The winter stomach is filled by summer hands," Ketil told his household through the harvest rush. That wasn't a proverb so much as the operating system of the year, confirmed by archaeology and echoed in law codes that keep returning to winter security. Excavated farms show storage size to households, not guesswork. Granaries on posts to keep out damp and vermin, sunken pits lined and sealed, and lofts for fodder and food. Capacities map closely to family counts and obligations for seed, rent, tribute, and trade. Law codes took winter scarcity seriously. In the Gulathing tradition, Coastal districts legislate sea marks and landings. Inland clauses regulate roads, bridges in winter. And across regional laws you see restrictions on selling fodder or grain at the wrong season, and rules for resolving hay and winter feed disputes. In short, don't imperil winter to profit in summer. On Ketil's coast, the food year really began with spring cod. Coastal sites preserve specialised gear for the spawning run, and heaps of fish bones in middens. Heads fed soups and stews. Bodies were split and air-dried on wooden racks, into stockfish, scried. A durable protein that keeps for years if well stored. Experimental archaeology and modern practice both confirm it. Fish swim into our larder twice a year, Ketil said of spring and autumn runs. Thorvald's inland rhythm leaned more on grain, hunting and hay. Storage spaces are larger, hunting kits are more common. The growing season was short but intense, long light compensated. Pollen and macrofossils point to barley as the core grain, with oats and rye in places, flax, peas and broad beans, and garden plots for onions, cabbage, turnips, kale, chosen for keeping qualities, not glamour yields. 3 fields feed us, Thorvald told his children, the ploughed field, the forest, and the wild meadow. Archaeology backs the mix. Hazelnuts, berries, mushrooms and greens show up regularly in deposits, not just famine food but planned seasonal harvests dried, smoked or soured for winter. Livestock strategy was ruled by hay. Kill-off curves in bone assemblages show autumn culling, a precise match between fodder on hand and mouths carried. One cow kept through winter eats what would feed many, Asa said, as the slaughter month neared. Breeding cows, milkers and work animals were kept. Young surplus stock went to the salting barrel or smoke rack. Summer milk had to be turned into winter. Finds include ceramic strainers, wooden churns and vessels suited to cheese making. Milk becomes winter through our hands, Asa said, working butter with salt where available, dear in many districts, and storing it cool. Cheeses dried or aged in ventilated spaces to travel the dark months and ease digestion. Harvest was an all-hands sprint. Iron sickles, wooden rakes, flails, sheaves cut and stoked fast before weather turned. Timing mattered. Downpours flatten and rot grain. What happens when stores run low? Ketil's youngest asked over the clatter of threshing. The question hung like a bell. Everyone knew the answer was discipline, in the field and in the storeroom. Autumn brought inventories, not just counting, zoning. Grain by type and use. Seed versus porridge versus ale. Fish by batch. Meat smoked, dried or salted. Dairy by age. Fodder measured to the mouth. Excavated storerooms show order, containers by purpose, access arranged for what's eaten now versus dead of winter. By first snow, the larder was as full as the year allowed. The next task was just as hard. Make it last, through wind-black nights and the long road to thaw. Preservation toolkit. Winter survival depended not only on what food you had, but how it was kept. Over generations, the Norse built a preservation toolkit, well attested across Scandinavia, that turned summer's perishables into stable winter calories. Food dies many small deaths before we eat it, Ketil said as they laid in stores. Our work is to choose how it dies. That pragmatism shaped every method. Salt was the most prized preservative on the coast. Sites with salt boiling pans and storage containers show production where fuel, wood/peat, was handy. Boiling brine demands fire. Salt travelled as a high-value trade good, and in some districts dues could be rendered in kind, fish, cloth, salt, depending on custom. On Ketil's fjord, salt went first to fish and select meats. Middens show the cut patterns, heads off for soups, bodies split, salted and barrelled. Properly packed, salted fish will last years if kept dry and cool, confirmed by both finds and living practice. Inland, Thorvald leaned harder on smoke. Excavations reveal separate smoking huts with adjustable vents and hanging racks. Alder, birch and juniper were favoured, chosen for their preservative smoke and flavour. Hot smoking cooked food for near-term use. Cold smoking at lower heat built long keeping into meat and fish. Fermentation, controlled souring, was the quiet workhorse. Archaeology gives us the containers, tubs, barrels, lidded pots, and useware. Residue studies point to repeated souring cycles. Cabbage, turnips, and other vegetables were salted and weighted under brine in wooden vessels. Fermentation is taming wildness, Asa said, pressing cabbage beneath a board and stone. Beyond keeping the food, the souring improves vitamin availability, a winter boon. Milk byproducts were soured too. Whey drinks and cultured milks travelled the dark months safely. Drying was nearly universal. Open sheds and indoor racks near the smoke path used wind and warmth for fruit slices, mushrooms, herbs, strips of meat and fish. Wind and time are free preservers, Kettle said, as they strung turnips and apples by the rafters. Grain, the winter backbone, got a layered defence. After threshing and winnowing, it was dried, on heated stones in small kilns or in warm lofts, then sealed in barrels or large jars, sometimes clay-lined, and lifted off the floor against damp and vermin. Where possible, farms used raised stores on posts, stabber, to keep grain and meal dry, dark and high. Grain sleeps best in darkness and dryness, Thorvald said, checking lids and latches. Dairy preservation ran on multiple tracks, butter salted, and where salt was dear, carefully reworked and kept cool. Cheeses made soft for near-term and hard for deep winter. The whey was too valuable to waste, soured for drink or cooking. Preservation wasn't one autumn sprint, it was continuous. Households processed each wave in season, rotated stock, watched for leaks, mould, rodents, and moved goods as conditions changed. The real sophistication was risk spreading. No single method was trusted alone. The same food might be split, some salted, some smoked, some dried, and stored in different places. Never trust winter to a single barrel, Keetle said. If one cask spoiled or a hut burned, the larder still stood. By the first heavy snows, both households had done what could be done. Stores were set. The slow workings of salt, smoke, sour and dry took over. The time of preparation was past. Deep winter has arrived. Now came the test. Making the planned summer carry the lived winter. Water, cleanliness and fire safety. The first blizzard came 3 weeks after winter's true onset, shrieking down from the mountains until the longhouse timbers creaked. Snow banked against the walls and drifted across the roof. Inside, Kettle's household settled into the rhythms that would carry them through the dark months. Water obeys different laws in winter, Kettle told his youngest as they checked the barrels. In summer you fetch it. In winter you engineer it. Excavated wells show insulating linings, clay, turf, packed moss, to slow freezing, and tool sets include ice picks/axes and long-handled dippers for safe reach. On Keetle's coast, a spring-fed run near the house had been deepened and stone-lined, then capped with a low turf and branch shelter, a pattern found at several coastal sites. So the surface skim froze, while water still pooled beneath. Roof leaks in deep cold were more than a nuisance. Water soaks insulation, breeds drafts and can drown a hearth. Excavations take roof maintenance seriously. Longhouses often show more than one hearth scar along the centre line, consistent with shifting the active fire during repairs rather than letting heat die. Inland, Thorvald's water plan differed. With streams sealed under ice, the community cut and maintained ice holes, insulated with boards, brush and snow, backfill between drawers. Where available, timbered wells with lids slowed, freeze up. Indoors, households stored covered buckets and tubs, topping them up by daylight when possible. Melting clean ice was preferred to scooping snow, which is mostly air and wastes fuel. The old question returned. What if the fire goes out? Winter practice kept a watched hearth. Embers banked, then fed, never abandoned. Archaeological hearths often show unbroken ash sequences through winter layers, a good sign fires weren't allowed to fail. Fire safety had the force of custom and law. Icelandic gragars and related traditions treat negligent fire that harms others as liable, and arson as an outlaw act, recognition that one blaze in winter can doom a neighbourhood. Fire is a servant that kills the careless, Asa said often. Burned longhouses in the record usually trace to hearth margins or sleeping areas where embers travelled, failures most households work to prevent. Practical measures show up in the dirt, water or sand by the hearth, clear lanes to doors, fuel staged away from sparks, and raised bedding with hearth borders, stone-packed clay, to stop rolling coals. Lids and shovel and pot kits sat within arm's reach. Cleanliness followed winter logic. Personal grooming didn't stop. Combs, ear scoops, tweezers appeared in graves across the north. But full bathing gave way to targeted washing. Hands, face, feet. Inside houses, finds lean towards small basins and dippers, not large bath vessels. Clean enough to prevent sores, not so clean we waste heat, Asa said. Wool garments were brushed and aired more than washed, preserving the fleece's lanolin and water shedding. Laundry focused on essential layers. When washing was needed, water was warmed in moderate basins, and garments wrung and hung high, where warmth and smoke hastened, drying and discouraged pests. Waste couldn't wait for spring. Middens show year-round use. Winter layers differ in content, more preserved foods, bones from slaughter, but not in continuity. Settlements set middens downslope and downwind, close enough to reach in weather, far enough to spare the door. For human waste, sites show latrine areas where ground is allowed. In hard weather, chamber pots, wood or ceramic, handled the night, with morning disposal on footpaths beaten safe. By midwinter, both households ran their systems with economy. Water drawn and stored covered, hearth watched, lanes kept clear, grooming maintained without wasting heat. These mundane routines, water, fire, clean paths, clean hands, were the quiet infrastructure the rest of winter life stood on. Sleep, shifts, and the night economy. The winter night was not one darkness, but a world of its own, with textures and rhythms that shaped household life. As the sun shrank to a pale visit, or vanished entirely in the far north, sleep adapted to preserve fuel, sanity, and the work of survival. Night is longer than day, but work is longer than sleep, Thorvald said, as routines settled in. Direct evidence for sleep cycles is indirect in archaeology, but historical sources across Europe describe segmented sleep, two sleeps with a waking between, and Norse longhouse layouts make room for that rhythm. The night has two sleeps with a waking between, Asa told her daughters. Platforms along the walls show wear from lying and sitting, and small finds near hearths, textile tools, knife offcuts, gaming pieces, fit quiet middle night activity in low light. First sleep began soon after dusk. Lamps were snuffed early to save oil. The banked hearth gave enough glow for safety. After several hours came the middle night waking, a spell of low light work and talk by the embers. Tasks then were simple and necessary. Check animals, tend the fire, turn hanging meat, listen for weather. It was also the hour for story, planning and private speech that day seldom allowed. The quiet between sleep heals the mind, Thorvald said. In a house full of bodies, that interval offered a thin strand of privacy. Second sleep ran to dawn, or the grey that passed for it. Winter activity patterns shift in the layers. More work clustered into the brief daylight. Evening tasks gather around the hearth. Fires show continuous ash sequences through winter floors, suggesting the house was never unwatched, good for safety and for the ember that started each day. To fend off cabin fever, wintertime was structured. Longhouse interiors sort into zones, cooking, craft, tool care, social sitting, so people moved between kinds of work, not just hours. The night economy focused on jobs that needed little light, or mostly touch. Textiles, Spindle whorls are among the most common household finds. Spinning can be done by feel once a twist is set. Fingers remember what eyes cannot see, Asa said, drawing thread by the hearth. Wear on whorls and distaffs speaks to constant use. Woodwork, whittling, peg making, handle fitting. Close work seen in chips and knife marks in winter layers. Small repairs accumulate when fields sleep. Small craft and maintenance. Leather patching, net repairs, needlework, tool oiling, all feasible with ember light. Games and teaching. Gaming pieces, Hanefertafel sets, bone counters. Turn up widely. Children's toys, little boats, animals, spools, mix into living areas, showing play with an adult workspace. Sleep itself was communal. Platforms along the walls, raised off drafts, held bedding of straw or hay, then woolen furs. Shared body heat was a resource as real as wood. By midwinter, both households ran efficient night economies, rest braided with production, watchfulness braided with warmth. The structure of time, as much as the pile of wood or sack of grain, was a tool that carried them through the darkest weeks. Animals as heaters and co-workers. As winter deepened, the boundary between human and animal space grew fluid. Excavated farms show a practical bargain. In winter, animals were heat sources and co-workers, not just property. A cow gives milk twice in winter, Kettle told his youngest. Once from her udder and once from her heat. Architecture agrees. Many longhouses or their outbuildings include byres/stalls under the same roofline or linked by sheltered passages. Phosphate mapping of floors often marks animal zones, highest in winter layers, beside human living areas, yet divided by partitions and gutters. On Ketil's coast, the most valuable stock, milch cows, breeders, working oxen, stood at one end of the house, separated but sharing the roof and general warmth. Drainage channels and manure tools turn up in such spaces. Households manage waste as fertiliser in waiting, stacking it where spring carts could reach. A single full-grown cow sheds roughly the heat of a small space heater, approximately 0.5 to 1 kilowatt. A few animals change a room's balance. That warmth came with chores, mucking, bedding, watering. Winter barn layers in excavations show regular cleaning and thick bedding renewals. Thorvald's inland plan was leaner. With colder air and tighter hay, stalls were smaller. Autumn culling left only animals that earned their feed. Breeders, milkers, draft beasts and wool. Bone profiles in winter middens often skew to older stock or selected young culled before the hay months. Beyond heat, animals worked the winter. Horses and oxen kept paths open. Repeated passes packed snow between house, well and store. Finds include winter horseshoes, with corks or cleats for ice grip. Smaller animals mattered too. Cats are common in household layers across Norse sites. Their most likely job was rodent control near grain and fish stores. A good mouser earns the cream, Asa said, and many farms plainly kept them indoors. Dogs range from small hearth companions to large herding hunting types. Skeletal wear and cut/repair marks suggest regular work. Guarding, hauling small loads, trailing game. And the distribution of dog remains and poor impressions inside houses points to shared living space. They were warmth, warning and workforce. The most intimate winter arrangement was with small fowl. In hard cold, hens and other birds were sometimes kept in baskets/boxes or penned zones inside or just off the living space. Easier to protect egg layers, easier to water and feed, and a focused heat source that could be moved. Outdoor stock that could not come inside still got engineered shelter. Turf-banked walls, double boarding where available, windbreak sighting, and deep bedding. Tool sets include winter forks, rakes and cutting bars for hay and icework. What about a winter berth? The question sharpened as bellies swelled. Byres often show small enclosed stalls with extra bedding, the likely answer for carving, lambing in frost, with warm water kept near the hearth and carried out quickly. By midwinter, people and animals formed a single heat work economy. Heat flowed from stalls to sleeping platforms. Grain flowed to mouths that pulled sleds. Manure flowed to the future field. Care went both ways, and that partnership carried both species towards spring. Coastal farm. The storm built like a wall. One moment Ketil's fjord lay under a hard blue sky. The next, clouds boiled over the ridge and the wind came with teeth. "Inside, now!" Ketil called, already swinging the shed door against the first volley of snow. "Secure everything and get inside." Coastal farms learned to build with the weather. Walls on the windward side were double boarded and turf banked. Yard walls made a bite that broke the gale. Outbuildings stood like fingers to catch and calm the blast before it hit the longhouse. Drains cut to bedrock kept the yard from turning to slush and ice. A spare doorbar leaned behind each threshold. A roof pole stood by the hearth to work the smoke vent when snow tried to choke it. Within minutes the household was at stations. Children lay extra bedding along the inner wall, fur side up, linen to skin. Asa ran the storm list without raising her voice. Hearths higher, roof vents checked, animals to inner pens. The animal end of the hall began to steam as breath and bodies raised the damp. Someone opened the little louver above to bleed it off before it turned to rime. Snow went past the smoke hole in hard horizontal lines. The first danger wasn't cold, but wet. Melt on the wrong beam meant drips on stores, rot in insulation, and a dead fire when you could least afford it. A bucket and cloth kit stood ready at the worst drip seams. The roof crew, 2 nimble teens, took turns on the ladder under the ridge, working the ljore with the long pole. Wider to clear smoke, narrower to keep heat, a finger's breadth at a time. Near the stalls, Frida called, "Mother." The ewe started. Winter births were a gamble. The ewe was moved to clean straw near the hearth, but not so close that heat would stress her. Asa set out the box no one liked to touch. Thin bronze hooks, bone spatulas, linen bands, honey pot. Ragnhild warmed hands under her cloak before she touched anything alive. "Hold steady," Asa said. The labour hung, then stalled. She worked by memory and breath, not panic. The lamb came small and silent, then coughed and found its voice. Tallow rubbed into tiny ears, straw for drying, nose to fix the bond. "Small, but it lives," Asa said, and only then looked up. Inside, routines narrowed to storm mode. Water was melt snow, not a fetched stream. Cleaner in a blow and safer than crossing the yard. A snow block sat on a grid, above the side hearth, melting to a slow drip into a waiting pail. Cookwork shifted to stores by the living space. A pot of barley and dried fish, a handful of sour cabbage to brighten it, a thumb of vinegar saved for weather like this. The grain pegboard dropped one notch at dusk. The fodder rope, knotted weekly since harvest, told everyone what was left without a word. On the second night the wind changed pitch. The house talked back in small groans. Snow drove under the eaves and started a roof sag along the north run. Ketil called for the purlin props, 2 shaped posts with padded heads, and set them under the long beam, a winter crutch to carry the load until the blow passed. He walked the windward wall with his palm, feeling for the chill stripe that meant a leak. The boys added another bank of spruce boughs outside where the draft told the truth. A storm finds every lazy habit. The door discipline stayed tight, one at a time, in and out, curtain closed, latch set. Ash lids went over open lamps before hands left the room. Children learned the quiet walk in a storm. The house carries sound differently when it's under strain. By day 3, the new lamb flagged. The ewe had little to spare. The cold takes milk first. Asa warmed a mix the house kept as insurance. Cow's milk thinned with whey, sweetened with a bit of honey for quick strength. A hollow bird bone served as a thin tube. The lamb took a little and then a little more. The hearth log pattern changed to protect the feeding times. Short billets often, not long sleepers, so someone was always by the fire when the lamb needed heat. When the wind eased at last, Ketil and the older boys cut their way out through a drift higher than a man. The boat shed had lost a strip of turf. The net frame was down. The north shed had a roof tied in knots by the gusts. None of it waited for spring. The roof turf was reset while it was still wet and heavy enough to bed. The net frame was lashed with fresh, tarred cord. The shed roof got a temporary patch of bark and poles, good enough to hold until a dry day. Repairs in winter were triage and sequence. What keeps heat? What protects food? What saves work later? Tool care ran alongside, whetstones out, edges dressed, iron rubbed with fat and soot to resist wetness. Fish racks were checked. Salt barrels were rolled to wet the joints and keep them tight. The storm ledger, a scrap of wood with notches, got 4 new marks. Lessons to build into the next calm day. The lamb lived, the house was held. The storm had taken fuel and fat and sleep, but it had not taken anything the farm couldn't replace. Winter work that pays in spring. Deep winter isn't dead time, it's investment season. What you repair, twist, scrape, stitch, and season now decides how fast you stand up in the thaw. The floor tells it. Curls of ash and birch, a drift of carded wool, a scatter of bark chips, a neat pile of iron filings by the oil stone. Ketil lays out the boat list. Oar blades first, ash billets split along grain, draw knifed on a low shave bench, the loom of each oar, oval where the hand rides, square where it bites. Edges are thinned and heat bent over steam from a kettle. Pitch glue, pine resin, charcoal, and a breath of beeswax warms on a shard of soapstone. Moss caulking is teased and tapped into plank seams with a narrow beater. Seams get warm resin brushed in with a bristle tuft. A sail patch is stitched in linen with a boar bristle, needle, and waxed flax thread. Corners take reinforcing tabs cut from old shoe soles. Rope gets spliced, frayed ends whipped and tarred. Buyer heat dries it all. Tool days run like liturgy. Hafts are checked for tight shoulders and wedged cheeks. The axe that rattles gets a green wood wedge and a lash of rawhide to set it through a few wet-dry cycles. Files are carded clean. Whetstones soaked and graded, coarse for shaping, fine for shaving. Bevel angles are kept honest with a scribe mark on a scrapboard. Iron gets oil and a rub of tallow to keep back bloom. Nails are sorted by length into partitioned boxes. The nail puller and pincers sit on the same peg every winter. Thorvald's inland bench looks different. Sled runners are laminated, thin ash slats glued with warm birch tar, then clamped with withies and set to cure by the hearth. Runners get bone or hornware strips, drilled and pegged. Snowshoes webbing is rawhide, cut wet, laced tight, dried then oiled to hold. Ski care is weekly, the glide ski scraped smooth, the grip ski dressed with fur strips set to point backward, both waxed with a mix of pine resin, fat, and a whisper of ash for the day's snow. Probe poles get iron tips reset. Barrels and bins are capital goods. The cooper's kit comes out. Stave edges are trued with a long knife. Crozes cut the chime groove. Hoops of split hazel are twisted and dried, then hammered down onto the raise. Leakage is smoked. A bit of damp cloth pressed along seams to find the whisper. Pitch seals what wood won't. Lids are scribed to each barrel. Each gets a mark scratched on the rim, so the right lid finds it fast in spring chaos. Textiles are silver in waiting. Wool is picked to free burrs, carded to align fibre, and sorted. Thell, soft undercoat for warmth. Tog, long outer hair, for strength and watershed. Spinning runs daily. Heavy whirls for warp, light for weft. Ussa keeps a weight line. Each spindle is weighed and labelled so thread types stay constant. Dye days punctuate the weeks. Madder root for red, woad for blue, lichen for golden brown. Urine vat turned and warmed behind a screen. Alum if trade allowed, iron liquor made from nails in vinegar if not. The warp-weighted loom stands braced. Loom weights hang even. Heddle rods tied clean. A temple holds cloth width true. A pattern band, narrow tablet woven trim, earns trade coins in spring. In the evenings, nalbinding fills socks and mitts, where knitting has yet to come. Leather never sleeps. Bark tan from summer sits in barrels. Winter is for cutting and mending. Soles are lifted and replaced, uppers patched with skived seams turned inward. Awls bore clean, wax thread and boar bristle pinch through tight holes. Lace holes get rawhide washers, mitts get fur cuffs to stop frostbite. Strap ends are doubled and stitched, then rubbed with tallow and soot, weatherproof and handsome. Smallwares pay quickly. Birch bark boxes are coiled and locked. Baskets are woven for fish and for fields. Eel pots are bent of split hazel and pinned. Bird snares tied with horsehair and a slip knot that never chews free. Net mending is a winter sport. Knots named, mesh counted. A torn square becomes a taut square, while a verse is sung. Candle forms are set, tallow clarified, rushlights dipped and racked. Lamp wicks are twisted from linen waste and rush pith. The preservation chain gets winter links too. Ember pots are made for travel. A small clay vessel lined with ash, a lid with air pinholes, a wire bale to carry under a cloak. Embers bedded deep will live from house to house. Soapstone trivets are carved to steady pots at precise heights for fuel thrift. Haybox chests are lined with teased wool and chaff to hold heat longer. Seed is counted like treasure. Barley is winnowed indoors, a basket and a boy's steady arm. Chaff to bedding, grain to seed versus meal bins. A germination test sits by the hearth. A handful of kernels sprouted on cloth tells if the field will answer. Ploughshares are filed, harrow teeth tightened, yokes inspected, harness stitched and oiled. A tool inspection day repeats each fortnight. Each item is named, lifted, and put back exactly where eyes expect. Time saved later is made now. Children apprentice by inches. One carves peg after peg until his shouldered fit slides true. One spins 100 arms lengths of coarse warp. One stitches a practice heel on a scrap sock. One files nails from sprues into neat piles. Each has a winter tally. When the notches fill, the child may choose one lesson: fire carry, splice, or a new knot. The last piece is a quality ritual. Every 7th night, inspection. Boat seams tapped, runners flexed, loom dressed tidy, edges keen. Floors are named without shame and assigned. This will pay us in thaw, Kettle says, and the line of made things is a promise. Oars stacked, barrels tight, ropes coiled, cloth rolled, shoes paired, tools sharp. When the ice lets go, all that waits is muscle and light. The work that couldn't be done in winter is met by work that is already finished. Moving on, snow and ice. The world changed its roads. Marsh turned to marble, lakes became boulevards, ridges with their wind-chafed backs ran faster than valleys, hip-deep in drift. Winter didn't block travel, it wrote a new map. Winter changes the map, Kettle said, handing his youngest the ice probe, a long pole with a hooked end. Test first. Step second. Close to home, feet got wintered. Leather shoes higher at the ankle, with an inner of knoll-bound wool, straw footbeds swapped often, and fat wax rubbed into seams to push back wet. On glaze ice, a pair of bone creepers, simple plates with shallow ridges, strapped under the sole kept pride and bones intact. Iron points were for longer hauls and animals. For distance, travel split into glide and haul. Skis lived through summer in the rafters and came down to be planed, waxed with resin and fat, and matched. One grip ski with fur laid for bite, one glide ski smoother and longer for speed. The binding thong sat over the forefoot, so the heel could lift clean. 1 foot pushes, 1 foot flies, Thorvald said, and the boy found the rhythm in 10 falls and 1 good run. Loads rode sleds, hand sleds with curved horns to pull by, or low drags behind a horse with cleated shoes that bit ice. Runners wore replaceable wear strips. Crosspieces were lashed so they flexed over rough ice instead of shattering. A lashing kit, thong, awl, pitch, rode with every sled. Winter eats rope. The sea doesn't truly sleep. Along the fjord, shore ice formed a rim. Beyond it, black water heaved and bellied under the wind. Fishers ran ice boats where they could. Light hulls they could push on ice and row in water, with reinforced forekeels for the hard part where the two met. Boat hooks and ice poles did double duty, keeping the craft off the bad edge and testing ahead. Ice has voices. Singing can be sound, booming can be safe, silence can kill. The pole told more than ears did. Blue hard is good, candled white is death, black thin under snow is worse because you can't see it. The rule was spacing. Never all on one line. Never trust where fox or hare crossed. Always carry 2 fires, flint and steel in the breast. Banked coals in a little lidded pot to light shelter with wet hands. Routes were memorised and marked. A route staff held the order in notches, split spruce, wind-cut boulder, the whisper bend where water muttered under ice. On forest tracks, travellers blazed with an axe. 2 cuts high on the side you should keep to on the way out, 1 on the other for the return. On open lakes they set brush wands at long intervals. In a storm a man could catch sight of one like a promise. "White out rules," Thorvald said before they left. "Stay together by hand or line, tree to tree if the world goes blank. Dig fast shelter if wind goes to scream." Shelter was a slit in the drift, roofed with a small sled, lined with boughs, sealed with snow blocks, warmed with the ember tin and a screened lamp. Steam tells on you, so does panic. They ate fat cakes and a wedge of hard cheese, drank hot snow from a pot that never fully left the coals, and slept in turns with boots under the shirt so they wouldn't freeze stiff. Signals were old and few. 1 longhorn for fire, 2 for stock loose, 3 for strangers, many for fight. At night a shaded lamp swing, once, twice, thrice, told a watcher which code to rouse. Time was kept by fuel and cold, a 2-billet watch or a 4-billet watch, frost climbing the inside of the curtain, an inch every hour when the wind backed north. Animals changed the speed of everything. A small fjord horse with winter shoes took a path down to ice and made it a road by sheer repetition. Oxen moved slower, but pulled through what horses refused, given time and a man with patience. Dogs kept their own lanes, packing a thin trail faster than any person could, and warning with a lift of hackles when the ice talked wrong. When something went bad, and winter makes sure it does, the plan came out of pockets. Spare thong and all for a broken binding, pitch for a cracked runner, bone needles and waxed thread for a glove seam split, twine for a repair that had to hold until home. A small fold of dry tinder fungus lived in every pouch. More than one life has hung on that brown scrap, taking a spark when fingers wouldn't. The coast and inland read winter differently, but shared the grammar. Test first, spread weight, mark the route, carry fire. You can see the language in the ground where a winter went well. No broken runner left to rot. No hoop iron abandoned in the reed ice. Only the faintest of brush wand shadows standing like punctuation in the wind. When the map thaws, these roads vanish without goodbye. Until then, they are the fastest lines the year will draw. Inland hamlet. The warning came at dusk, 3 clean horn blasts rolling off the frozen trees. In summer, visitors were ordinary. In deep winter, unexpected movement meant risk. "Secure the stores," Thorvald said, taking up his axe. "Tool first, weapon if needed. Everyone into the main hall." Upland farms along the Norway-Sweden line carried winter defences into their daily layout. Sightlines were kept clear of drifted snow. 2 approach paths were maintained in case one choked. Core stores sat where they could be guarded if doors were forced. Outside, the snow itself was part of the plan. Paths were packed narrow to force single-file approach. Windbreak hurdles doubled as screens so you saw arrivals before they saw everything inside. A spare door bar leaned by each threshold. A hand sled stood at the back exit with a blanket roll, an axe, and a small chest of first things to save. The boys had banked a snow berm along the windward wall earlier in the week, now both insulation and low breastwork. In the rafters, a coil of plaited rope and a bundle of stake pegs waited for fast problems. Within minutes the 3 families had gathered. Children went to the raised platforms. Water cauldrons came up to the hearth, good for cooking, ready for dousing if embers leapt. Men stood by doors and wall slits. Inland halls often preserved this logic in their bones. clear views to entrances, tools near access points, and a thought-out way out. Torches glowed at the tree line, 6 figures on skis, hauling a small sled. Through the smoke hole, Thorvald watched their pace and spacing. "Not raiders," he said at last. "Too open, and they bring a wounded man." Winter violence had its own grammar. Quick strikes, quick retreats left burned thresholds and bodies near doors at some attack layers. Little warning, brief fights. This approach was different. Ragnhild, the most practiced healer, set her kit by the warmest hearthside. Needles, linen strips, a small box for salves, tools for splits and frostbite. Inland finds often include such pieces. Winter care didn't wait for spring. The visitors were from a hamlet 2 days east. A storm had scattered their hunt. A skier had broken his leg on hidden timber. Hospitality protocols, visible in many house plans as overseen guest space in view of hearth and door, came into play. "East platform," Thorvald said. "Clear a spot by the centre hearth for the injured." Help began with heat and water, not bread. The travellers sat until their hands softened and faces lost that frightening stiff pallor cold gives. Then broth, never dry bread first. Warm liquid woke the gut without harm. Portions were measured against the week. A pegboard by the grain bin marked how many scoops remained. Each evening 1 peg moved down. Guests ate what the house ate, and once warm, worked what the house worked, fetching melt snow, shaving kindling, mending bindings. So gratitude turned quickly into shared labour. Gifts were small but binding. A length of good cord, a chip of whetstone, a twist of pitch. The unspoken rule was simple. No one leaves a house poor in winter if it can be helped, but no house bleeds itself white. Balance was maintained by witnessing promises to repay at thaw. Their gear matched inland travel sets. A light drag sled, snow probes for testing depth and crust. A striker light and tinder, spare thongs and a lump of resin for fixes. "What if raiders come in winter?" a younger man asked. "Then we have these," Thorvald said, nodding to the ready rack by the door. Spears, axes, bows kept serviceable through the dark. Law traditions in the region, like Frostathing, speak to the same balance. Shelter to travellers in peril, duties of guests, a household's right to protect its means of survival. Ragnhild examined the leg. Set by the fire's edge, traction and straightening, splints carved to fit, linen binding, and elevation on a low frame. For pain and swelling she brewed bitter willow bark and a honeyed drink. Honey also dressed shallow wounds. She checked fingers and toes for the waxy shine of frostbite and warmed them by skin and breath, not flame. She greased knuckles and heels with tallow and beeswax to keep cracks from deepening. A small clay cup by the hearth held charcoal powder to dust weeping skin. Boiled linen strips dried on a hoop near the smoke hole for the next change. Healing in winter ran on schedule as much as materials. Dressings at the middle night waking when the hall was quiet, doses noted by the fire's feeding rounds, and lessons for the patient. Good pain is the dull pull of knitting. Bad pain is sharp heat, swelling, stink. With extra bodies in the hall, Thorvald reset the watch rotor. Winter nights followed the 2-sleep rhythm. First sleep until the coals thinned to red. A middle watch for 2 men to circle byre and woodpile. Second, sleep toward dawn. No water clocks, time was kept by fuel. 2 arm-length billets for a short watch, 4 for a long. Horn codes were simple and old. 1 long for fire, 2 for loose stock, 3 for strangers, many for raid. Each watcher tucked a bark-wrapped ember tin under his cloak, so a dropped lamp wouldn't leave him blind. At changeover they exchanged 2 facts: wind and cold, tracks seen or not, so no one started ignorant. Over 3 days the hall adjusted. Food sharing followed custom. Guests brought dried meat and fat. Hosts offered bread, broth, stored greens. In winter layers you often see more varied food traces, clustered where guests sit. 2 households' provisions meeting in 1 pot. Chores rotated without fuss. Someone always with the injured. someone always tending coals, someone always checking where drift pressed too hard on the windward wall. On the fourth day, the man was stable but not travel-ready. News had to go back. A companion could not be left alone. 2 stay, 4 return, Thorvald said, a common winter bargain. You can read such choices in the middens, a brief rise in fuel and food use where guests linger, a drop where messengers depart with rations taken. Departure was a method, not a hurry. They laid a root staff on the bench and notched it with landmarks in order. The split spruce, the ice-scarred boulder, the bend where the creek muttered under the skin of ice. A runner shoe and 2 spare thong lashings went into a dry pouch with a thin bone awl, a flat of pitch wrapped in birch bark, and a small needle case. Each man carried 2 fires, flint and steel in the chest pouch, banked coals in a lidded ember box, and a leaf of dry fungus for a quick catch. If whiteout came, they would make tree-to-tree progress by touch, setting a marker branch every 50 steps to find their way back if the ice spoke wrong. They left in a grey light, the hall quieted to the work of staying warm and fed and whole. By the wolf month, the sun's arc had lifted a finger's breadth, enough to throw a thin blade of light along the floor at noon. It cut through a hall that ran on tallies. The grain peg stood at half. The fodder rope, knotted every week at harvest, hung a quarter from the beam. The wood wall showed a pale rectangle where the last stack had stood. People read these like scripture. Hard trials queued themselves. Illness first, coughs that lingered, an ankle that swelled each night, a child's ear that burned at the touch. Then temper, the mutter about a door left on the latch, the quick snap over a miscounted scoop. Thorvald set a speaking hour at the middle night waking. Complaints were heard, answered, and barred from the day. Food changed colour. Fresh had gone. The sour barrel and the dry bin ruled. Asa brightened stews with the last dried apples, and a thumb of beer vinegar saved for this month, and taught the girls to toast a little flour to pull nut sweetness into lean bread. A fat cake, dried fish bound with tallow and herbs, was cut and shared on the 7th day, more symbol than meal, but strong for morale. Still, the frameworks held. Heat and light tended on schedule, movement planned, mutual aid honoured. Guests became helpers. Helpers became friends whose names would be remembered at Springmoot, when favours were reckoned. The map of snow would change again soon. The first drip would tick from the eaves. A bird would misjudge the cold and sing. Not yet. Between now and then lay the long practice of doing the next necessary thing, in order, together. Health, injury, and remedies. The fever took the smallest first. Ketil's youngest woke hot and glassy-eyed, breath whistling in her chest. Asa didn't raise her voice. Lamp lower. Herb, chest here. Curtain up. A spare wool hanging made a little bay at the end of the sleeping platform. Warmth kept in, cough kept out. A dedicated cup and spoon were set beside her. The household knew not to share. Winter sickness had a shape coastal people recognised. Wet air, smoke, close quarters, and the slow creep of chest sound from rough to tight. The remedy chest held dried thyme, yarrow, angelica, Iceland moss, juniper, birch bark, and a lump of spruce resin wrapped in linen. The little hand mortar, stone with a shine worn by years, made dust from leaves. Steam came first. A shallow pot near the hearth took water and a pinch of thyme and pine resin. Hot stones, lifted with tongs and wrapped in damp cloth, went in one by one until the breath rose sweet and sharp. Asa held the child's head beneath a linen tent and counted slow breaths until the chest loosened. A chest salve, goose fat cut with a smear of resin and juniper, went over ribs and back, rubbed until skin warmed. For the cough, a thin honey water with a whisper of angelica. Not strong, not much, just enough to soothe. Sit her up when she sleeps, Ketil said, setting a wedge of straw bolster behind the girl's shoulders. Midday, when the wind went briefly still, the ljore opened wide, smoke bled off, damp purged, bedding aired by the open vent for a count of 100, and then down again before the room lost its heat. Inland the cold cut is different. Thorvald's men hauled a buoy from black ice, with hands that burned from it. No fire. Wool first, Ragnhild said. Wet things came off with a knife and care when the cloth wanted to cling. The boy went into dry null-bound wool, layered light and many, laid near but not too near the flame. Warm stones, smoothed last summer for this very use, heated in the ashes, wrapped in cloth, and set to armpits, groin, and between shoulder blades. Heat the heart first, fingers last, she told the younger girls. When colour returned to the lips and the shiver came, they fed him broth and sweetened whey, not much at once but often. Frostnip they knew by sight, white skin that turned red with sting. Frostbite they feared, wooden and numb. No snow rub. No open flame, Ragnhild said. Hans went into lukewarm water in a wooden bowl near the hearth and sat there while someone told a long story. The heat rose with patience, not courage. Bones broke anyway. A fall from a sled, a misstep on rhyme. Thorvald's splint basket waited by the door. 2 flat laths, 2 rounded wool pads, linen bands, a sling. The bone remembers its line, he told the man with the bent forearm. 2 men held above and below. Thorvald drew straight in one smooth pull while the breath was out. The arm lay between the padded laths, bound firm with woven bands, then hung in a broad sling, so the hand sat higher than the heart. A willow bark decoction, bitter and honest, took the worst of the ache. Cuts and gouges were everyday trouble. Rot was the enemy. Asa's rule ran in 3 steps. Clean first, close second, protect third. Clean was warm water with a pinch of salt or a time wash from the simmering pot. Grit came out with a bone probe or a bit of linen twist. Edges were snipped neat with small shears if they were ragged. Close was horsehair or fine linen if the edges met. If they didn't, a resin plaster, spruce pitch softened with fat. Took a linen pad and stuck it tight. Protect was a honey dressing, under a dry wrap, changed when the cloth spoke sour. Hands were washed in warm water after, even when water was dear. Asa kept a little bowl by the hearth for exactly that. Burns came from lamps and kettles. Cold first, snow packed in a cloth, or cool water poured steady from the dipper. Then clean linen, then honey thin and shining, then cloth again. No fat on raw heat. No bursting of blisters, unless heat had trapped under skin and begged release with a small clean prick and a resin wash. Eyes stung in smoke months. A rosewater rinse lived on the shelf for those with ash-smarted lids. Linen shields, little half-masks, hung near the combs for nights when the smoke layer got low. A sweep of light wood across the rafters once a week kept soot from drifting down all at once when frost let go. Teeth carried the grind of stone-milled grain. Ache got clove-scented mead if there was any. Most houses had none. More often it got warm salt water, a soft linen wick dipped in honey and herb, and thyme. A tooth key was a rare thing. Most houses owned patience and distraction instead. Childbirth waited for no season. The birthing board, planed smooth and oiled, came out from under the platform. The linen roll laid ready, the knife for the cord re-rubbed with resin and salt. Warm water, steady hands, quiet voices. A poppy seed infusion was known in some places. Asa's house did not trust it. They used heat, pressure, honey and prayer, and counted their luck openly when both cried. Sore minds showed before sore bodies. The mind freezes before the body knows it's cold, Kettle would say, when a man went quiet too long. They fought it with work that finishes. Light when there was any, mead shared when the pegboard allowed, story at middle watch, and the walk to the door and back every day, a path was safe. On bright noon frost days, the bedding went out 5 minutes to the beam for clean air and sun on cloth. Enough to lift the smell, not enough to steal the heat. The house held a sick watch like a fire watch, names on a tally, a cup of broth marked for the patient, a rag for the brow tucked into the curtain rope. Tools for care lived together. Mortar, spoon, scalpel, horsehair, band, and a bundle of kindling, so the watcher never had to leave the room for flame. By late winter, both households had paid the season's due. A fever loosened, a bone set, a hand saved from black, a scar to remember a lesson. None of it was luck alone. It was stored knowledge and steady hands. The winter craft that keeps names in the house list when spring finally speaks again. Risk, theft, and winter lore. When the barrels ran low, glances got longer. A missing sack of barley, a lid left ajar, footprints where no one should have walked. Winter sharpened not only hunger, but suspicion. Summer law needs witnesses, winter law needs wisdom, Thorvald told his son, after settling a quarrel over a vanished side of smoked meat. Formal thing assemblies could not ride the snow roads. Judgment lived under each roof. The high seat, that slightly raised place by the central hearth, became a court as much as a chair. The householder heard, weighed and ruled, with kin and servants as audience and two steady folk as oath helpers when the matter bit deep. Come thaw, a spring thing could affirm, amend or fine, but winter needed order now. Storage spoke law before any words did. Grain sat in the loft behind a removable ladder, barrels on trestles so mice met wood and not staves, a locked chest with iron hasp and key for salt, and tools too dear to lose. Doors bore crossbars smoothed by hands, and latch strings were drawn in at night. You can read the house's anxieties in its joinery. Double pegs on storeroom doors, a staple set too high for a child's reach, a little cavity in the sill where a key sleeps wrapped in wool. Theft in winter was not the same as theft in summer. Gulathing practice held that matters urgent for life, food, fodder, fuel, drew harder payments when stolen under snow. In winter, theft takes breath, Kettle told his neighbours when a barrel of dried fish went light. Froster custom likewise counted season, and need in measuring wrong. Take what a man can replace in a week and pay once. Take what he cannot replace till summer and pay dear, and in some places lose honour standing until the debt lay fully returned. No one quoted clauses. Everyone knew the shape. Proof wore different clothes in winter. Tracks told truth. Stride, tread, nail pattern, the way a man drags a bad knee or sets a heavy load. A broken crust by the fence, a smear of resin on a cuff from a particular barrel lid, a snow-bruised patch where someone had stood long to lift. Arthur would walk a dispute with a stick, and patience while tempers cooled by the fire. If proof ran thin, the householder could demand an oath on the ring, hand to iron, name spoken, claim made clean. Refusal weighed nearly as much as a confession. Some takings were lawful borrowings under winter need. Gulathing custom allowed a traveller to cross fields, to cut shelter boughs, even to take a hearth ember if death stalked close, but the taker must leave a token, a knife, a belt tongue, a carved tally, and report at the first door. Fail that, and the taking slid into theft. This is why a tally rod hung by Ketel's door, notches for loans of tools, fodder, salt, with marks matching pledges left behind. Inside the community, winter justice moved in steps. Hold fast the peace, cool words, separate the barrels, set 2 men to watch. Hear both stories at the high seat, walk the places named. If proof stands, set compensation. In kind if possible, grain for grain, fish for fish. Else value in silver, measured by season and scarcity. If proof fails, demand an oath with 2 oath helpers. Record on the tally, bind with a handclasp over the oath ring, due at thaw if not sooner. If a man will not pay, mark him low in honour till spring thing. Until then he sits far from the fire and last to the bowl in other houses. Fire had its own law. Gragas called careless flame a grave error. Embers carried to bedding, lamps swung under dry thatch. Fines and out-settlement could follow. Arthur kept water at the hearth, an ash tub with a lid, and a lamp hook set well away from curtains and rope. Children learned the phrase with their letters. Ash cold, ember dead, door barred. A man who smoked the loft with a greenwood blaze kept watch for 2 nights as penance, lamp in hand while the rest slept. Out beyond the fence, risk wore strangers' boots. Winter raids were rarer but cruel, vast, quiet, hungry. Inland hamlets kept a snow watch, a raised stand cut clean of drifts, a horn wrapped in wool against freeze, a dog that knew men by gait. When the horn blew twice, women banked fires and pulled bars. Men took spears and bows to pre-tramped lanes that gave firm footing where an enemy floundered. Caches, a shovel, a spare bowstring, 2 flat cakes, hid under a marked stone beyond the last fence, because sometimes scattering saved lives better than standing. Inside the theft cut deepest. Law made room for hunger, and shame both. If a thrall stole food, the owner paid, first in discipline, then in compensation, for a hungry servant reflected on the house as much as on the hand that took. If a guest stole, he was stripped of guest right, named aloud at the next gathering, and no door opened to him without a surety walking at his shoulder. Winter also bends boundaries. Frozen rivers became roads. Marsh turned to meadow hard as stone. Frost custom let men cross and camp where summer forbade them, with limits: no fence broken, no haystack touched, no store opened without token left and word given. A man who kept to the rules could knock on any door and ask for ember, water, and a little bread. A man who did not find horns calling neighbours by name across the snow. When payment could not be made at once, Winterlaw asked for sureties. A brother, a neighbour, sometimes a pledged tool laid in the other's chest. Tallies matched, 2 halves of the same split stick, each with the same notches. In spring the halves met. If notches aligned and goods returned, the stick burned, and the matter died. By late winter the tightest weeks arrived, stores thin, tempers thinner. What kept hands from throats were habits and known rules. Oaths on iron, tokens for borrowings, double due for life goods, fire watches, paths patrolled, guests helped under law and named under law when they failed it. When the ice went soft and the roads opened, the thing would hear the winter's list. Most would arrive already settled, silver weighed, grain replaced, hands shaken over the ring, because men who had to live together through the next winter preferred a peace they had made themselves. Spirits, stories and sanity. The worst cold presses on the body, the longest dark presses on the mind. The Norse answered it with a winter sanity kit. Story, song, games, small rituals and scheduled kindness, kept as deliberately as firewood. Stories are food for the winter mind, Asa says when the lamps are trimmed low. The hearth becomes a stage. A story stool, smoothed by years of seats, faces the house. In a wooden bowl by the stool lie prompt objects. A whetstone from a grandfather's voyage, a bead from a bride price, a fox tooth from a lucky winter. The teller lifts one, and ancestry walks into the room. Hands pass heirlooms while the tale runs. Touch keeps memory from slipping. On wall pegs, keepsakes, a worn arm ring, a notched oar blade tip, come down only on these nights. Children learn who they belong to. Some nights are for kennings and riddles. What drinks before it eats? What has one eye but sees little? Losers stoke the fire. Winners choose tomorrow's tale. Laughter burns clean. The house plays Hanefatafel, the king hunt board game with bone and glass men kept in a leather bag. Stakes are work favours. I'll take your dawn water run. Never food. A winter ladder of play is posted by the high seat. Round robin, then challengers. No rematches the same night. Skill is admired. Sulking pays a forfeit of extra ember watch. Children get a small board scratched onto a plank to copy moves. Quiet hands, busy minds. Song follows speech. Asa's daughters keep 2 song strings, work songs that match breath to motion, carding, treadle, chopping, and sitting songs, lullabies, travel verses, simple lausavisa anyone can add to. The house knows the response lines, even the shy sing. Once a 7 night, Ketil declares, light feast, 1 extra fatwood splint for a longer song, 1 sip of mead all around. The lamp burns brighter, the mood lifts on cue. These tiny indulgences are planned, not begged. A schedule beats a slump. Craft circles make talk useful. Women spin by feel, passing a spindle to the next hand when a verse ends. Men carve net floats and peg pins. Boys learn a clean-wedged tenon on scrap. A girl practices linking stitches with a bone needle until her loop holds strong. When she perfects the heel turn, she earns a splint of lightwood to show it off. The table holds a practice tray, crooked whirls, first pegs, wobbly dice, kept proudly. Improvement is seen, that keeps spirits fed. The calendar punctuates the dark. Midwinter, deepest night, is marked by a cleaned house, a shared roast, and the long story, the full family chain told name by name. Bread and a small cup are set by the doorpost for the housewight. A sliver of iron rests on the threshold. A rowan twig hangs under the lintel. In Christianized houses, a cross of chalk goes on the beam. In others, a sunwheel is scratched with a coal. The point is the same. This house is held. Between first and second sleep, the watch hour belongs to quiet rites. Ragnhild places salt on onion cups to read the coming weather by morning damp. Ketil listens to dreams from first sleep, the time he trusts most for meaning. A talking cup makes rounds on tense nights. Each person says one fear into it, then drinks. Fears stay in the cup. At noon, the grievance bowl comes out, pebbles dropped in for slights that felt too hot to name at night. Stones are counted, named and answered. The bowl is emptied before dusk. The house sleeps lighter. The children have their own medicine. Shadow beasts prance on the wall, antler offcuts and carved silhouettes thrown against the smoke-lit boards. A shallow water pan becomes a fjord, where toy boats, whittled from scrap, race with a puff. A quiet hunt sends them to find three things by touch only: the smooth peg, the braided cord, the warm stone. Every find earns a story nib. When your grandfather's boat, a sentence or two paid out like sweets. Neighbours are sanity too. When weather allows, exchange nights rotate between households. One song, one tale, one new thing learned, not a stitch, and news. Guests sleep in sight, near the door and fire, under guest blankets only used for such nights. A host's ladle is a mark of honour. The visitor brings a token, a bundle of splits, a pouch of dried berries. The ledger of visits owed is held in mouths and memory. The warmth is held in bodies under one roof. On sharp, bad days, Arthur orders comb and clean, not vanity, survival. Combining eases tempers, washing hands / face / feet, refreshes minds without squandering heat. Nails are trimmed, hair rebraided, and clothes brushed to lift wool's nap and mood both. Afterwards the house looks different, and so does the day. Once each 7 night, a change day flips sleeping spots and workstations. Fresh angles, fresh talk. By late winter the Sanity kit has visible parts. The story bowl, the game bag, the song string, the grievance bowl, the light feast splints set aside in a dry corner. And the invisible parts hold shared timing, shared attention, shared mercy. When the sunline creeps farther down the wall plank at midday, the songs begin to change. Rowing songs return, plans step into meter, and the house rehearses spring before it arrives. The late winter squeeze. The last weeks before thaw were when plans either held or cracked. Bins thinned, tempers shortened, and every choice cast a long shadow. Floor layers from this season tell the story plainly. Smaller fires, longer boils, finer wood splitting, pots parked permanently by the coals. The Norse met this hinge of the year with systems they'd tuned for generations. "Count what's left before you count the days," Asa said as she lifted lids. The storage tubs had scratched tallies along their staves and peg holes set at ration points. A barley barrel bore char marks where the day's measure should stop. No guessing in the hunger month. A narrow chest held measured ladles and ration spoons. The biggest spoon lived on a cord hung out of reach, so no one could accidentally choose it. Some crocks were partitioned with thin boards, so a day's portion could be removed without exposing the rest. These habits show up archaeologically as scored vessels, reused staves, patched lids. The larder moved into the light where eyes could guard it. Food changed character. The winter stomach learns to be satisfied with less, Asa murmured, tipping boiled bones into a mortar. Heads, frames and joints were reboiled to surrender marrow and gelatine until bones grew soft enough to crush for a thickening mash. Fish heads went first to broth. Skin and sinew turned into strength rather than waste. Coastal middens from this window show more cranial elements, more crushed bone, and a rise in seaweeds, knotted wrack and dulse dried in summer, now rinsed and shredded into pottage for mineral salts. Bread yielded to barley gruel, stretched with whey, then to one-pot stews that lived all day at the fire's edge, fed little, yielding much. Late winter cookware reflects the shift. Heavy ceramic and soapstone pots for stable simmering. Trivet stones set low for ember cooking. Tight lids clothed in damp cloth to keep vapour in. Asa revived a trick her mother taught her. Haybox cooking. A lidded chest packed with warm straw. Bring the pot to a boil. Nest it in the straw and let trapped heat finish the work while saving fuel. Soup is the diet of the prudent, Kettle said, and the house drank heat first, hunger second. What if winter runs long? The answer lay in second stores, small caches kept away from the main house, so one fire, theft, or weak will could not empty a year. A lidded pit under an outbuilding, plank-lined and moss-sealed, a sealed barrel slung in the loft of a boat shed. Inside, dried fish, a wheel of aged hard cheese, smoked ends, a bundle of angelica stalks and leaves, a twist of dried berries held back from autumn. These were opened with witnesses, then resealed and remarked, a spoken ledger everyone agreed to keep taut. Thorvald's inland house rode the squeeze with snow and silence. Hunger makes poor hunters, he told his sons, so those who must range got the best bowls. Inland scatters from this season show temporary butchery spots on scoured edges, hare, ptarmigan, elk when luck turned. Snares set at fence gaps and willow thickets, deadfalls along hare runs, under ice lines checked at dawn by birch wands, frozen into lake skin. Tracks funnelled where bark and browse remained. South-facing slopes warmed sooner, and animals found them first. Fuel tightened as surely as grain. Hearth deposits from the hunger weeks carry more twig and split fine roundwood, less resin-rich knotwood. The last log must last twice the first, Kettle said, and the fire obeyed. They banked deeper, cooked on coals with lidded pots, and moved work so more bodies shared less heat. The door to the byre stayed curtained. Sleeping platforms migrated inward until cold corners became storage. In some houses a warm core formed. One half hall lived bright, the rest went idle to save fuel. When greenwood had to burn, vents were cracked carefully. People kept low in the clear layer, while smoke roof-cured timbers. Children brought heather, birch twigs and bark on clear days. Driftwood stacks at the fjord edge, salt-washed, slow-burning, were rationed like silver. Rations had choreography. The morning bowl came small and salty to wake the body. Midday took the largest share in what light there was. Evening went light and hot to help the house sleep. Eat heat, not hunger, Asa said. Drink the broth first. The strongest ate first only when their work fed all. Hunters, wood carriers, the fire watch. Then the line flowed by age and need. A ration cord tied around the ladle's handle marked how deep it could dip. No one stepped past the cord. That was winter law, as sure as any code. Fuel thrift made new habits. Ash banking at night kept a red heart alive till dawn. Ember pans, shallow iron trays, let them drag heat where hands worked. Asa saved fat pine splints for lamp-bright moments. Splinter a knot, wedge it in a holder, and buy 15 minutes of good light to finish a seam or read a tally. Health narrowed with the bowls. Old people moved to the brightest strip under the roof vent for noonlight. Sour cabbage if a barrel survived, angelica shaved into broth, or a few dried bilberries went to children and those who must hunt. The herb chest yielded willow for aches, thyme for chests, honey thin to coat throats. Ragnhild brewed whey ale, a warm, thin drink salted lightly to keep the weak drinking. Quiet hours were declared after dusk to save both oil and breath. Story nights replaced long talk when voices sharpened. Social strain was managed as deliberately as fuel. Thorvald set a rotation of dignity. Each adult took one small authority for the day. The ladle, the doorbar, the ember pan. No one carried the same power 2 days running. Disputes were put to the high seat at noon, never at night. And a truce cup, a sip of warm milk or thin ale, marked the end of argument, whether settled or shelved. When failure threatened, they broke losses into parts. A cracked pot was laced with wire and daubed in clay. A split runner was butterflied with rawhide. A loose door latch took a wedged pin and a promise to fashion a new one when the thaw brought work light. Late winter floors show repair clusters, strap patches, handle wedges, stitch outs, because a broken snow hook could make a widow, and a weak door could spill a night's heat. Law and custom anticipated the squeeze. In the hunger month, we are one household across many hearths, Thorvald said at a doorway moot. Winter decisions, loans, cash openings, ration changes, were spoken aloud before witnesses. Emergency sharing leaves its trace as matching food signatures across neighbours in late winter layers. The same smoked cut, the same barley blend. Debts ran to fish days or field days when summer came. The ledger lived in memory and mouths, not ink. Some nights the house gave back to the mind. Game pieces came out for the middle watch, so hunger had to compete with a riddle. Children carved net floats from scrap and fished a basin by the fire. A new spindle whirl with a smooth bore spun like a promise. The ewe that lambed in last month's storm gave a cup of warm milk to the eldest before bed. Ritual sips can be more than fat content. Markers of change arrived quiet. Icicles dripping at noon. The roof crust bearing, a man at dawn but breaking by afternoon. A wedge of light sliding farther along the wall planks at mealtime. A crow's call turned from warning to argument. "Count the days again," Ketil said, and the tallies met the sky with a little faith to spare. By the time the south wind found the fjord and inland streams began to mutter under their ice, both households were thin but unbroken. The pots held their last broth. The woodpile showed more bark than heartwood. The ledger of favours and food ran longer than any summer list. But the systems, tallies, caches, shared bowls, saved heat, rotations of dignity, had done exactly what they were built to do. Bridge the last, hardest gap to a spring that could now be worked, not merely wished. The Thaw's work list. The first promise of spring is light, not heat. The sun stripe on the longhouse wall creeps lower at noon. Dripping starts on the south eaves, though the air still bites. That is the signal to open the thaw ledger, a fixed order of work that turns winter's stored strength into summer's speed. Spring ruins the house before it feeds it, Ketil warns. So the work list begins with what protects the roof and floor, then what moves, then what grows, then what feeds. Safeguard the house. Roof triage. Snow is raked off in lanes, not all at once, to spare the turf. Loose sods are lifted, birch bark layers are checked, drip edges rebuilt with fresh turf, smoke hole boards reset after winter warping. Temporary bucket lines that caught leaks in midwinter are replaced by true fixes. New sod, warmed pitch on peg holes, retied lashings. Rule: never strip more than a man's width without laying the new sod. Spring wind steals heat fast. Drain the yard. As the frost lens softens, cut runnels to carry meltwater past thresholds and storage pits. The central floor channel inside is cleared of winter fines, so slop drains again. Duckboards or split plank walkways are laid between door, byre, woodpile and boat shed. Mud steals time. Byre swap out. Old bedding is forked to the middens and earthed. The byre is laid with dry straw and brush to keep hooves above wet. Hoof knives trim overgrown edges. A smear of tallow and ash seals small cracks. Calving and lambing pens are re-roped and moved to the driest corner. Ready the things that move. Boats eat first. Moss seams are teased out where proud. New moss caulking is tapped home, and pine tar warmed in a pot is brushed along the seams. Thole pins are checked. Oar blades bent and dressed in winter are fitted. Sail patches stitched in frost time are roped back. Ropes are recoiled dry, blocks oiled, bailers found and tied in. The soundness test waits for a day of calm. A push-off at the landing. A short pull, one eye on the seam line. Arsa. If the boat fails, all else waits. Ice honesty. Thorvald carries the ice probe. Darkening ice is poked at each span. Crossings move to reinforced footlogs where the lake tears first. Spring ice lies, so loads are sledded at dawn when the crust still holds, or detoured to ridgelines where snow thins. Sleds to wheels or boots. Runners are detarred, dried and hung, where strips unpegged and set aside. Summer drags are lashed and checked. Ski furs are dried and stored. Wax cakes are wrapped in linen against mice. Animals through the door. Turn out by mouthfuls. Livestock goes to grass in measured minutes. 10, then 20, then a half hour. Always hay first, so the gut remembers work before sweetness. Tether pegs are driven on firm ground to keep hooves off the boggy patches. Milk and birth peak. Colostrum bowls and clean cloth sit by the byre door. Belly bands and splints for weak lamb legs are pre-cut. The lamb ledger starts. Mother mark, birth order, whether it sucked, whether it stood. Weaklings get whey-thinned milk with a drop of honey by bird-bone tube until the ewe catches up. Spring ailments watched. Eyes for foot rot, bloat, and milk fever. Salt is kept at the gate, wood ash offered in a shallow pan to settle bellies. Fields. From frozen to fit. Soil tests, not guesses. A rod test punches down to find the last frost. A fist test squeezes a ball. If it smears, wait. If it crumbles, work. Edge fields, sandier knolls. Open first, lowland waits. Manure and ash. Winter dung is carted and forked thin on the earliest beds. Hearth ash is scattered where the soil is sour. Where middens are rich, a patch is double dug for the earliest greens. Seed honesty. Barley from winter is tested on cloth. 10 kernels on damp linen by the hearth. Count the sprouted after 2 and 3 nights. The seed bin is weighed and split into must plant and may plant, so hunger later doesn't raid the field's future. Tools to hand. Ard scratch plough beams are eyed for checks, shares filed, harrow frames retied with fresh withy, brush bundles for harrowing abound. The yoke is fitted to the team that's kept strongest. Harness holes are moved a notch for new flesh. First foods, first tonics. Sea and shore, coast. Low tides yield dulse and sugar kelp, rinsed and hung on lines, plus periwinkles and limpets for the pot. Nets set in winter are lifted. Old cod heads are boiled to jelly, bones crushed for broth and glue. Forest and verge, inland. Nettles, gloves on. Ramsons, wild garlic. Sorrel, cow parsley young shoots. Angelica, kept carefully. This one is medicine and food. And birch sap tapped with a sliver and a peg into a small keg for spring drink. Ragnhild's first green soup becomes a house rite. Bellies remember plants again. Brew wakes up. A small quick ale. Sprouted barley dried on a stone. Crushed, scalded, sweetened with honey if there's any. Goes up to lift spirits and sterilise water when the melt runs dirty. People, promises and paths. Work gangs across fences. Neighbours trade hands for hours. 2 men to each roof ridge, then trade. A day of road making. Laying brush and poles, corduroy, through the worst of the mire. Resetting way cairns flattened by snow. Things on the horizon. As travel returns, winter disputes are written in mouths. Who speaks? Who witnesses? What fine is sought? Dues and gifts are set aside. A cloth band, a cheese, a sheaf of dried fish. For spring markets and the Varthing, spring assembly. Trade pack staged. A basket with winter-made goods. Tablet woven bands. Spare mitts. Bone needles. Birch bark boxes. Pitch cakes. Is weighed. Measures and weights checked so no man can shame the house at market. Week by week rhythm. Guide, not chains. Week 1, light rises, cold holds. Roof lanes, yard runnels. Byre clean out. Tool sharpening. Boat seam survey. Seed test starts. First nettles. Ramsons. Week 2, midday thaw. Morning crust. Boat tar. Ore fitting. Thresholds raised. Corduroy paths. Manure ash to early plots. Lambing peak. Milk routine settles. Week 3, muck season. First scratch plough on high ground. Harrow brush drags. Animals to grass in short watches. Repair fences. Brew quick ale. Collect seaweed at greens. Week 4, soil opens, water breaks. Broader ploughing. Barley and pea sowing on right soils. Harrowing. Set fish gear. Plan first market, tock thing travel. Light and ration only when field is in. Rations. While you rush. Food stays tight until seed is down and the first nets and pots pay. The haybox chest comes back out. Stews brought to boil, then tucked to finish on trapped heat. Work crews carry handcakes and dried fish. Water is boiled and cooled to avoid melt sick. Signals they trust, not dates. Birch bud swells to a mouse's ear. Barley soon on high ground. Oyster catchers shrilling on the fjord. Boat days return. Skylark inland, harrows out. Ants moving under stones. Frogs in ditches where they live. Soil breathing. Ravens tugging old thatch. Roof fibre for nests. Replace what they steal. When true spring finally sticks, the house is already moving at summer speed because spring work was decided in winter and begun at thaw. Boats float, roofs shed, paths hold, animals graze, seed sleeps in good soil. The winter ledger closes with one line, paid forward. Lessons of a season. The last snow withdrew into the stone shadows and ditch bottoms. Frost still clung in the mornings, but the light had changed. Harder, higher, honest. Both households opened their winter ledgers and began the work that doesn't cut wood or sow barley, but makes next winter easier than the last. Counting, judging, changing. Each winter writes its lessons on those who survive it, Kettle said, setting the empty barrels in a row like a truth-telling. The Norse treated this as a season of audit and redesign. You can see it in the archaeological layers, springtime repairs that become permanent features, strengthened thresholds, shifted outbuildings, altered drainage lines, tool handles recut, storage enlarged. The record shows not inertia, but iteration. Heat and structure audit. Roof and smoke hole. Winter buckets that caught drips are replaced by fixes. New turf laid tight over birch bark. Lashings retensioned. Smoke hole shutters planned to seal better in crosswind. From burned beam patterns and soot gradients, we know roofs were made more adjustable after bad winters. Longer shutter poles, better pegs. If we fight the wind, we lose. Let the roof learn to move, Kettle said, and changed his shutter rod leverage. Windward wall and door. Coastal farms add extra banking and a second inner curtain. Inland halls reset the door plank. Add a low sill step to stop floor cold. Many sites show the adoption of double doors, vestibules after storm winters. An airlock that saves heat. Drainage. Where meltwater pooled, new runnels are cut and lined. Interior floor channels are reclayed. You can trace these in spring layers. A changed slope, a second groove. Asa marked where the animal end went sour in thaw and demanded a higher plank walk the next year. Fuel, light and fire protocols. Wood math. The ashbed tells the truth. They rake and measure. How many armloads burned per week in bitter cold? How many in ordinary dark? Next year's stack is set by measure, not hope. The common rule of thumb they taught their children. Whatever you think is enough, add a third. Lamp discipline. Empty oil flasks are counted by notch. Households often add a second, smaller task lamp to save the good lamp for reading or fine work, explaining the mixed lamp sizes in fines. Light is dearer than gold in winter, Thorvald says again, and sets a rule. 1 lamp only in first sleep, 2 at storytelling. Hearth safety. After a near-miss ember on bedding, Arsa fixes new habits. 2 water jars by the hearth, ember pot always covered when carried, sleeping furs pulled back a hand's breadth from the fire edge. Fire scars in excavations match these living rules becoming built routine. Food and fodder accounting. Barrels speak. Empty fish barrels, half-emptied grain tubs, butter tubs with the salt ring low. The consumption map is made. Next summer's targets are set in numbers. 3 more barrels of screed, a larger cheese shelf, 1 extra cask of sauerkraut. Storage pits are sometimes enlarged or fitted with rack guards on posts. Changes visible across seasons. Culling math. Bone heaps show which animals went late. Thorvald recalculates. Too many mouths kept past midwinter. Next year he'll cull earlier and put more grass into cows that give through the dark. If hay ran thin by wolf month, he tells his sons, we fed numbers, not value. That changes. Emergency foods. Ketil notes how often seaweed and head broths bridge the hunger weeks. He places a separate cache of hard foods away from the main store. Archaeology shows these second caches appear after hard winters. A small barrel by the animal end, a sealed jar under a bench. Clothing and footwear revisions. Where it failed, fix it. Threadbare knees, a hood seam that leaked, a mitten thumb that wore through. Arsa lays each piece out and repatters. Wadmal at stress points is doubled. Toggles replace ties where ice glued knots. Many textile finds show second season reinforcement stitching at elbows, shoulders and hems. Boot truth. Soles are checked. Where ice creepers bite too hard, where seams wicked melt. Next year's last gets a thicker welt. The liner mitts and socks get an extra knoll binding spiral over the toe. Your feet are your winter freedom, Ketil repeats, and the kit shows it. Tools, boats and gear improvements. Handles, not heads. Iron is precious, handles are cheap. Tool marks in finds show rehandled axes and adzes each spring. Grip ovals are thinned for small hands, thickened where blisters told the tale. The tree tells you what it wants to be, Ketil says, swapping birch for ash in an oar that flexed wrong in storm chop. Boat lessons. A seam that wept gets a wider seam batten. Thole pins are rotated or resighted. Pine tar stores are adjusted upward after a wet winter. Spare ore is added to the rack. Archaeology shows boathouse floors repegged and chocks moved. The static plans were rare. Boats were tuned annually. Winter kit tweaks. Ice probes lengthened. Sled wear strips made replaceable. Ski fur changed to a better nap. Repairs and design changes leave their print in the small parts we find. Health, remedies and practice. Refill the chest. Honey jars refilled, willow bark cut and dried, linen boiled and stored, char cloth remade, warm stones selected and set aside. Ragnhild writes this in her way, laying items in a known order and leaving gaps for what ran out fastest. Remnant residues in containers from spring layers show the same restocking pulse. What worked stays, a steam tent over a child's chest, a bird bone tube for weak lambs, warmth to the core first for the waterfallen. Healed bones in the record and adapted splints in the toolkit tell the continuity of this empirical medicine. Mind care. They note which stories lifted people, which games calmed quarrels, where the bench should shift to catch the noon stripe of light. The living space is rearranged for next winter. Storyteller's stool moved, gaming board shelf added, lamp hook shifted. Exactly the kind of small positional changes we see between floor phases. Law, trust and neighbours. Winter justice written for thing. Complaints, thefts, accidents. Spoken records are rehearsed for the spring assembly. Frostathing and Gulathing custom allowed winter rulings to be confirmed later. In practice, that meant a head of house prepares witnesses and finds now, not later, debts and gifts. Who shared hay when the buyer went thin? Who helped roof the gale? A gift path is set for summer markets, cheese for boards, a fish barrel for a borrowed team. Archaeology shows this as mirrored goods at neighbouring sites. Reciprocity made visible. House rules that become architecture? What began as spoken rules become wood and earth. Don't open the outer door without closing the inner becomes a vestibule wall. Keep ember pot lidded becomes a lidded ceramic with a leather thong. Lamp oil is a finger. A night becomes notched lampstands. Never trust one barrel becomes separate storage points under separate roof lines. Across years, this is how custom turns into plan, and why digs uncover so many small, thoughtful upgrades accreted like rings in a tree. Ledgers closed, aim set. They end the audit with 3 lines every house understands. What we ran out of first, increase by a third. What we never touched, store better or make less. What nearly killed us, change the plan, not the hope. Asa ties up the seed cloth with a better knot. Thorvald adds a second warning post on the lake path. Kettle carves a tiny mark into the shutter pole where the wind seized it and drills a new peg hole just above. By full spring, the lessons of one winter have already become next winter's savings. Visible in thicker seams, smarter doors, stronger handles, truer paths, better barrels, and rules that are easy to obey because the house now helps you obey them. This is what the soil layers show. Not one great invention, but 100 small mercies learned in the dark and kept in the light. The wind no longer had teeth. Spring stood in the doorway with Asa, bright on puddles and boot tracks. Behind her, winter's machine was being taken apart and packed away. Bedding aired on lines, floors scraped and reclayed, lamp hooks shifted for summer light. Archaeologists see this moment as a distinct pulse in the layers. Spring cleaning deposits, reorganised hearth edges, moved benches. To those who lived it, it was simply the first long breath after the long night. That first killing cold, the night that must not fail, felt distant now, but the checklist from that evening had carried them through. Food against teeth and vermin, water barrels full and covered, extra fuel within an arm's reach of flame, livestock double latched in winter quarters. Dig sites across Scandinavia show the same 4 pillars of survival, repeated for centuries and refined but rarely replaced. They persisted because they worked. On the coast, storms had taught their lesson again. The northwest corner that needed extra banking on the first cold night stayed vulnerable all winter. Now Kettle was thickening that wall and reshaping the drainage. You can see this kind of spring fix in many halls. Windward walls rebuilt, thresholds raised, roof shutters repegged after a season of gales. The seal skins for the door, he'd said that first night. The door frame's wear marks, season after season, bear out how often that simple defence saved the hearth. Inland, different trials left different signatures. Ragnhild's notes about the children's sleeping platform, more straw beneath, or they'll give their heat to the floor, proved right all winter. In the layers, that becomes a new underlay, a higher plank walk, a wider fur strip at the draft line. Winter changes the map, Thorvald told his sons before they set out across ice. The kit that carried them, skis, ice probes, ember boxes, is found again and again where the winter roads ran. The winter's questions met their answers one by one. How do you carry fire across the ice? With a clay-lined ember box, wool-packed, lid pegged tight. What happens when someone falls through? Core first, then limbs. Stone warmers wrapped in cloth. No rush to flame. How do you keep a house from burning while you heat it hard? Water at hand, clear paths to doors, ember pot always covered, rules that become built features. If you eat it in January, when did you earn it? In July and August, when fish were dried, milk turned to cheese and butter, cabbage to sour, grain to safe sleep in cool dark. Spring's work began before gratitude was finished. Boats tarred, roofs mended, tools rehandled, seed tested, targets set from empty barrels and worn gear. This cycle, prepare arrow, endure arrow, learn arrow, improve. is why the material record shows steady, quiet change. Not one grand invention, but 100 small mercies kept and taught. Thicker seams here, smarter doors there, handles that fit the hand that uses them, storage split, so one leak can't drown a winter. The lesson that outlasted the night is simple and hard. Constraints force clarity. The Norse solved for heat, light, food, water, health and sanity, because the dark made the build due every day. Their answers, preserved in wood grain, soot stains, toolware, bone heaps, lamp soot and floor clay, are still good answers wherever winter, literal or otherwise, is long. If this journey through the long night changed how you see medieval life, stay with us. More evidence-driven history is coming. 2 quick favours to help keep this work alive. Subscribe to Viking Times and tap if you want more deep, source-based documentaries. Tell me in the comments, would you try 2 sleeps for 1 week? Yes or no, and why? Your experience might appear in a future episode. Watch next, linked in the description. The Finns and Bjarmians, snow forest hunters, Vikings feared. How northwards tactics, skis and snares, humbled raiders. Blot and oaths that were real. Ritual, oath rings, and why words could bind a life in Viking lore and belief. The night ends, the work doesn't. We bank what we learned and build the next season on it.